All right.
Oh, thank you.
So is this miking to the room or just to the, you can hear it here as well? Okay, is that too loud? I usually am a very loud speaker. My mother is from the Ukraine. My father was from Burbank. He was in the Navy after World War II. This was boisterous times. I grew up in a family where we were loud all the time. So I guess I'm just a loud person. It doesn't bother me very much. It looks like we're almost ready to start. So I already asked everybody that was here earlier, when did you start programming? So we have a couple more minutes we can do that. So we had some people who started before I started. I started programming in 1983. I think I wrote my real first lines of code in 1983. I bought my first computers in 1983, an Osborne computer. I bought two computers almost at the same time. One was a dedicated production machine that ran some equipment, and the other one was what you might consider a regular business computer. So there was at least one that started before 1983. So let's ask, who's started programming before 1983? So there's just the one. Wow. So that's good. I like this. If my brother was in the room, he could tell me that he beat me by about 10 years. So let's see, how many of you started programming more than 30 years ago? More than 30 years ago. Still just a handful. How many of you started programming at least 20 years ago? Wow. These are a lot of beginners. So how many of you don't program at all? You don't program in what you do. Okay, a few of those. What do you do? What do? You don't code?
I'm just give a snack support.
You give the snacks to the team. So you're a scrum. So what is it, Linda? They with the best food wins, right? So you win because of that. Alrighty, so I think we're about ready to start. Somebody can guide me. Are we ready to start?
Sorry, but interpreter is not.
はい、通訳入りました。
So please wait.
はい、通訳入りました。
We're ready to go?
He's coming out, but
同時通訳設定お願いします。
All right. I've had interpreters at a few places I've been. I pace myself for that, so let's see how it goes. I'll keep my eye on that. So,
Woody, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
okay.
Can you hear me?
Oh, can you hear me? I can hear you. Excellent. So we can start.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
So thank you so much for coming. I'm not so afraid of large groups anymore, but this is a decent sized group. So I want to make it clear, if I stumble in my speaking, if you can't understand me, if I'm not loud enough, let me know. If I need to slow down, get me to slow down. Okay, I'm not very self-aware, so I might not notice. So let's go. I'm going to share with you this idea of software teaming and the power of flow. When we first started talking about software teaming, people wanted to know a lot of details about it, but all we knew was we tried something we liked and people started asking about it. So I want to warn you, this slide from Peter Block is telling me something very important. I can't tell you what to do, but I want to share with you what we did because it might spark some ideas for you. Before I really learned Agile ideas, I read a lot about it. And if those people weren't sharing, I would never have learned anything. So that they shared was their way of bringing these ideas forward, and I'm just sharing here today. We have several people here who have written books, and some of them wrote books in those days when I was first learning about this stuff, including Michael Feathers, who I saw here. I doubled my knowledge of how to work with legacy code in one reading, because I read your book from cover to cover. I couldn't stop. I go, yes, yes, yes. If he hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have ever learned those things. So I'm just here to share some things. They might be useful to you, maybe not. So I'm going to give a very quick introduction to mob programming. If you don't know what mob programming is, or I'm not calling it software teaming, Call it anything you want. I don't care what you call it. But I want to make this very clear. If you don't know what this is and want to learn more about it, there are other videos of me speaking at conferences where I introduce the idea. And there are other people who have made videos who introduce the idea. So this isn't something that's a hidden secret knowledge. You can find out about it easily. But I want to tell you very quickly, this little description is what we would always use. It's all the brilliant minds working on the same thing at the same time, in the same space, and at the same computer. That seems silly, but it actually worked very well for us. I want to emphasize something here. There are no rules. There is no rules. If somebody comes up to you and say, you're not doing software teaming, you're not doing mob programming because you're not doing what Woody told us, the only rule I have is work well together. Figure that out. How are we going to work well together? That doesn't mean you're working without conflict of ideas, but let's get along well while we're working through these conflicts. There's no other rules to me about this. If we gather together all the brilliant people, we will have all the skills and knowledge we need to do the work we're setting out to do. If we have all that, that allows us to work from everything we do from start to finish without, I'll say it this way, we can work from start to finish directly without any of the interference we normally get when we divide the work up. And that's what this talk is about. You can see this is not our original team, but it's some of our original team members. I think we took this picture in 2012. And I'm going to make a very clear point. It looks like we're smiling, but we had a camera that was doing a time lapse. So we had thousands of photos where we could find one where it looked like we were smiling. Okay, so you can kind of guess that this team works well together. I used to say, and it doesn't count anymore, that if you cannot smell your teammates, you're not on a team. But that doesn't work because we work remotely now. But we don't sit so close that we're annoying to each other. But we're not going to go into any details of that. It can be done remotely. This is a team doing it back, I think, in 2016, before the pandemic. But since the pandemic, many people have been working this way. It is not 5 people watching, 1 person working. It's very different from that. It's 5 people working and 1 person putting their work into the computer. So to do that, we need techniques. I don't care what techniques you use. Many people say, oh, you have to use a timer. That happened to be where we started. We used a timer originally. Don't think about the rules. Think about what do we need to be effective in what we're doing. So we think of the idea of the driver. That's the person sitting at the keyboard. It's like you get into a taxi cab. Because everybody else is going to be on this journey guiding the taxi cab where we're going. And the cab driver, we don't get into a cab and say, where will you like to take us today? When you get in the cab, you tell them where you're going. We want to go to the airport. They might ask, which airport? So we might need to get more detailed. That's the basic idea. So we might say, we need a drop-down that lists the regions. And if the person at the keyboard knows how to code, they put that in. Maybe they put the drop down and say, where do we get the list of regions? And we give them a direction for that. So as we go, we give details as needed, high level as needed. This is not an introductory talk, so I want to get through this pretty fast, but we use this guideline that came from Llewellyn Falco. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. This requires that we be pretty good at communicating with each other. And communicating is a lot more than me saying an idea and somebody else hearing it. The beauty of this, and I think one of the reasons this is so powerful, is that communication goes on all the time in our work. There's nothing we do where we're not communicating with other people somehow. This allows it to be very direct. We learn what we've miscommunicated very quickly working this way. And I think it's one of the powers of working this way. But this seems crazy. I have trouble pronouncing preposterous, so I don't say that, but that's what it does. It's preposterous. It's crazy. Why would we work this way? And I'm going to show you all over the world, there are people working this way. So this was our original place at Hunter Industries, but we go on here. These are different teams all around the world. I visited most of the teams you'll see here, not all of them, but this is all over the world. I don't know how many teams are now doing it. I've trained probably, well, I've done sometimes I think I probably trained over 1,000 teams. Maybe it's a lot more than that. I haven't really counted. But these teams are all over the place. And I think if it wasn't working, people wouldn't be doing it. Hopefully. You can see one there. I did not train these people. Is this going to work? It does. I did not train them. But it looks like they're working all together on the same thing at the same time and at the same computer. So I said, sure, that doesn't mean I invented it. Somebody else probably invented it. Maybe Grace Hopper invented it. You know? Who knows? Oh, you saw one down there at the bottom. Oops, let's go back to, Japan. I did not visit this. If anyone knows who that is, I think that was at a conference. But I like that. I visited 3 places while I was here where they were sitting in a room like this on the floor. And I thought, okay. And so I tried it. I'm not so good at sitting on the floor anymore, but pretty nice. Okay, so let's get on to what this is about. I want to make a big point here. This is not programming. This is a space shuttle mission. But it's all the brilliant minds gathered together to work on the same thing at the same time, and most of them in the same space, but I think some of them are in outer space, because whoever's in that thing probably isn't in this room, but you get the picture. So this is the same thing, the same basic idea. We can't do the mission without all the brain power there. They couldn't do this mission, and it's funny, each one of these placards shows a different skill area. Each one's focused on their own details while they're paying attention to the overall mission. Now, I actually have met with people at NASA to talk with them, actually have them answer my questions about this, and it's a very similar concept. And so in many lines of work, we do this, and that's part of what this talk is about today. So why exercise, but we'll just skip through it. Why would we work this way? Here's some of the things we noticed and a lot of people noticed. Lots of knowledge sharing, continuous code and design review. That's a very powerful thing. Many perspectives on the work, many different points of view. We get very rapid feedback, especially if we have our customers and our product experts sitting and working with the team. We focus on the right things. Now, we'll cover this stuff later. This enhances the flow of the work. It eliminates the queuing and the inventory. Queuing is waiting. Inventory is anything we've worked on that people are not yet using. Most companies don't even know there's such a thing as inventory in software development. But it puzzles me, but that's something. We would end up with better solutions, higher quality, and it was more fun and less stressful. Now, that's not true for everyone, but we found it to be a very gentle way of working because we had all the brains together. So our job became much easier to do. There's another reason we might work this way. This is for those managers here. Why would we work this way? Because the team decided to work this way. This is really critical. We were attempting to be self-organized, self-directed, self-managed, any kind of a self thing like that you can think of. Okay, so whenever I would give this introduction, I would get this question. And the very first time I ever gave this talk, I got this question. How can you be productive with 5 people at one computer? And my first response was, I don't know, does that matter? Because I don't think it really matters. The how didn't matter to me. That we noticed it was working was what was important. We were paying a lot of attention. That's been my job for about 20 years, is to pay attention. What's working, what's not working, what can we try, what's the next experiment? You know, what's the next thing coming up that we might want to know about? But we noticed this. When we worked separately, this indicates a team of 5 in separate cubicles. We added up the work they did. At the end of some period of time, we got a certain amount of work done. This is actually 2 days worth of work, according to our records, before we start working as a team. Now, I don't believe measurements of this sort are useful, but we had to make this argument eventually to our management. But when we worked together, we were getting a lot more done. Our figures actually showed we were getting about 10 times the amount of things completed. There's lots of reasons for that. And I don't guarantee that. I do guarantee that if you try this, you will learn things you can then teach me. Because this will expose things you're not used to. You'll learn things, and then I get to learn them. So please do that. It wasn't just this versus that, because it wasn't just more. It was the more meaningful stuff. We were steering to the better things because we were sitting and working as a team. a whole team. And I'll explain that in this talk. And it was better done. The code was cleaner. The solutions were more what our users wanted. It was easier to maintain. It was easier to read our code. It was easier to enhance. It was easier to remove things. I often never see that one happen, but let's go on. And it was much higher quality. In the 3.5 years I worked at Hunter, after we started working this way, dozens and dozens of, I've gone through the records, I don't know how much stuff, many projects, so to speak. We only had 3 bugs reported back from production in many, many applications. 3. We didn't need a bug tracking system. The quality was so high, and that's because we had all the brains sitting together. That was my thinking. And we knew this had something to do with being in a system. So this is a definition of a system from Russell Acuff. You can find his writings on him speaking on the internet. You can buy his books. Brilliant thinker. But basically, we're not interested in adding up the stuff 5 people can do. We're interested in finding out how productive will we be when we're all interacting well. That's sort of what this is about. And I think that's what Agile's all about. So this question, I didn't like it so much. My father, you're going to be introduced to him now. My father was an engineer, kind of like a systems engineer. He designed switching stations and was a troubleshooter and stuff in the phone company. Way back when phones actually had wires connected to them, okay? And you would have people would physically make connections, you know, plugging in. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. An operator sitting there. You want to call someone, you ring the operator and they plug you into something that gets you to that other person. That he started working in those days. So anyways, he would say this. Let's see if this is, that's my father. That's my father about 20 years before I met him. I would have liked to have met him at this age. Couldn't figure out how to do it. He used to say something like this: a good question isn't for answers. It's for finding a better question. And when you find the right question, you'll know it. So you keep going through a process of finding better and better questions till you go, this is where I want to be. So that's the story I'm kind of sharing with you today. I wanted a better question. My father, his name was Eugene, and I will state this right now. I wish he was still here, because all the things that I do, I want to ask him about. But he told me, basically on his deathbed, he was studying mob programming. All the things I had written and the talks I was giving at that time, and he said, you don't think you invented this, do you? Because they had worked this way doing their engineering when he was young. So yeah, we didn't invent anything. We just started doing something other people got interested in. So here we go. I wanted a better question. I didn't like this. And another thing he would say to me, usually the first question that's asked is a blocking question. Do you know what that means? It's there to counter or argue against whatever it is you are sharing. So he said, you got to be careful not to just answer the question. So one of the first things to do is think about, well, what question would you like to answer? So I looked at this. I didn't like that word productive. This is about productivity, a very small side trip here. There's 3 words we commonly use in the US that are sort of related here. We can be efficient, we can be productive, or we can be effective. And I'll define those for you real quickly in a very condensed manner. Efficiency is about utilization. Is this machine running as fast as it can? That sort of thing. Is it doing it with as little waste as possible? Productivity is about getting things done. We want to get things done. The keynote this morning kind of covered this, so thank you for covering that already. Effectiveness is about getting the right things done. Now, how you define that, that's up to you. But I don't like the word productivity. I'm not interested in productivity because efficiency itself you can measure just by measuring how busy everybody is, the busy work. Is everybody working hard? The productivity, are we getting things done? And effectiveness, are we getting the right things done? So this is important to me. So I want to change that question. I want to ask it this way, not productive. I want to ask, can we be effective? How can we be effective? Now, I still didn't know how to answer this, but we're starting to get to something I wouldn't mind being able to answer. So now we need to take the next step. And this was my father's guidance. He would have said this: you need to understand the point of view of the person asking the question. If you don't understand that, you will answer the wrong question. So anytime someone would ask that question, how can you be productive with 5 people? Like here, I'd ask any questions and people would raise their hand. Afterwards, I'd note who they were. I'd go to the audience afterwards and say, could you explain to me how you think things should be? And they will usually say something like this. They believe that separating people is good for many different reasons, and here's a few common ones. Okay, I want to get 5 things done, not just 1. So if we have 5 things being worked on, we're getting 5 things done. Now, I would usually hold my tongue, but I think that's faulty because we're not getting 5 things done, we're getting 5 things worked on. So there is probably an assumption here. Another way they say it is like this. I don't want to pay 5 people to do the work of 1. There is no work in software development that is the work of 1. Not nowadays. And even when I first started programming, although, well, let me put it this way. If you're the only user of the software, and you know how to write the software, and you know what it's supposed to do, you probably don't need to work with anyone else, unless you don't know how to write that software, which often would happen to me. So all of our work requires more than 1 person anyways. We just break it up. We break it apart. Okay, so now the next step is we need to flip it over. We need to flip this over and ask the question from the point of view of that's opposite from the person who asked it. So how can we be productive with 5 people at 1 computer? The reverse is from my point of view. How can you be productive if you separate the people that should be working together? Pretty straightforward, I think. So if we have those 2 questions, they're neither better than the other. This is a process. It's letting us learn what is the right question, and we're getting real close to it now. So when we separate people, interestingly, sometimes we put them in separate cubicles. But if they're separated by skills, let's say this is a tester. I don't know, maybe that's a tester. I can't tell the difference. Let's say that's a tester. They maybe eventually get put into the testing department, and the database experts in the database department, and the coders in the developers department, and the product owners, and so on. We move them to separate departments where they're even separated further conceptually than just being in different rooms or in different cubicles. So this is how we get to the better question. This led to the better question, and there's 2 more questions. Well, how can we prove one way is better than the other? And that's really what this talk is about. I can't do the research. I'm not a researcher. I'm not an academic. I don't have that kind of money, and I don't know who does. I've read the stuff that Laurie Williams and others have written about pair programming, and we can extrapolate from that. But boy, it's really hard to say, this is the information that proves this or doesn't prove this. But I've had people come up to me and say, they would say something like this: where is the research that proves that mob programming is better than working solo? And I would reverse that question as well. Where is the studies that prove that working solo is better than working as a group? Because it would be the same exact research to prove one way or the other. So everybody thinks, or a lot of people think, we should be working separately without any proof that that's better than any other way of working. I learned to pair program in 1998 or 9, and it took me 2 or 3 years to get good enough at it to have it become my preferred way of working. So where's the proof? The proof to me was I got more done. It was higher quality. It was a more gentle day, and so on. So what proof do I need? But let's go on. So this led to this was the question I landed on that really helped me. What are the things that are currently happening to us that make it difficult for us to get our work done, that destroy effectiveness? Now, probably 1,000 times now, I would ask that question and I would gather the Post-it notes. And this is from a 20-person team. In 3 minutes, they came up with this list of about 50 items. I don't know if any of these are problems or not, but look at these things. I love these. This pairing here was my favorite. Somebody said too much noise, and somebody else said too quiet. So different points of view, right? But some of the biggest ones for me: workflow interruptions, context switching, distractions, not knowing how to do something, multitasking, waiting on a dependency, time zone differences, unclear requirements. This is a short list. I have a list of about 200 of these items that I've gathered over the years. It's on some disk that I no longer can access. But there you go, okay? So what we noticed was many of these things simply faded away when we started working as a team. We never set out to solve a single one of those problems. This animation here will show you what I'm talking about. A lot of these things faded away when we started working as a team. You don't seem amazed at all. I spent hours figuring out how to do that fade. Isn't that really marvelous? Okay, that doesn't prove anything, but this is what we noticed. So many of those problems we used to have just disappeared. I'm only going to talk about one of them. This communication problem that I call the question queue time. Now, I coined that term. Maybe somebody else has used it. I haven't found that anywhere. It's the amount of time that we must wait to get the answer to a question that is blocking us. That amount of time that we must wait is the question queue time. A queue is a line that we wait in. I like being here. In Japan, you understand lines. You get in line and you patiently wait your turn. That's what I like that. This is what this is about. We're waiting in a queue. The question queue time is very common, and the waiting is waste. We'll see more about this later. But here's the point of it. We can take this question queue time and we can measure it. This is one thing I know I can measure. I can measure it with using a simple style of a value stream map that I learned from Mary Poppendieck. You must have had her to some of your conferences here. She's brilliant. So in this case, the green line, if you're colorblind, that's the top line. The bottom line red. The top line is showing we're getting good work done. The bottom line is we're in a queue. It's one thing you can measure with the value stream map. So whatever's above is adding value. Whatever's below is not adding value. That's the waiting. And there's other kinds of queuing as well. Okay, so what are we going to do? If we use an example, hypothetically, what if every hour we work, we get one blocking question? So that means if we're working 8 hours, we're going to get 8 questions in a day. So we can use this to measure how might this effective. This is all like a thought experiment. If we have 0 queue time, we're just effective all day long. What if we have a 2-minute wait to get an answer? What if we have a 10-minute wait to get an answer? We're wasting an hour every day. If you went to your boss right now and said, I just discovered a way that we can waste an hour a day for every one of our workers, would your boss be happy to do that? Well, they're already doing this because it's usually, when I do this as an exercise in a company, I will ask them, how long does it take you to get an answer to a question that's blocking you? And they'll usually say 2 hours to 2 days. That's the average that I get, somewhere in there. We're wasting our whole day. So what do we do about this? How do we typically solve? Somebody please tell me. What's that? We work on something else. We multitask. We bring in more work. And what do we call that work? That is inventory. We're blocked on something, so we bring in something else to work on. We've increased inventory, and inventory is a waste. You cannot deal with a waste by introducing more waste. It just increases the waste. This is troubling. Okay, so I define inventory this way. It's work that we started on that we haven't yet delivered, so nobody's getting value out of it. So this inventory is a waste. What do we normally do? We work on something else, and now it looks like we're busy all the time, but we solve for the wrong thing. We solve for the symptom. We're not busy enough. We didn't solve for the problem. We're not getting answers quickly. Now, this is just one of many communication problems, but I like this one because it's so clear. So how did we solve for that? It's a trick question. We didn't solve for it. It faded away. Remember that marvelous animation I shared? It faded away. When it faded away, we started noticing this, that if the question was for a team member, we had 0 waiting time. But if it was someone who wasn't on our team, we all of a sudden were introducing a period of waiting. And the first big one we noticed was with our product owners, because they weren't really on our team. We noticed 4 groupings: the product owners, the testers, the database experts, and the people who did our deployments back in those days. Those were where we had all the waiting. So we realized the team isn't complete with just the developers. We need all these skills, all the brilliant minds working on the same thing. Now that's ideal. It's hard to get all the brilliant minds and to have no queuing, but we want as much of that as possible. What we noticed was when our product owners would guarantee that they would get back to us immediately, their work could sail through our system. And the ones who wouldn't get back immediately, their work was slow getting through our system of working on creating new software. So we realized, well, somebody on the team said, what we are achieving when we do this is a kind of one-piece flow. We start on something, we work until it's done. Now that's a valid concept. It's worked for us. I don't know how valid any of this stuff is. I'm not a scientist, like I said earlier. We try things, and if they work, they work. Here's the thing. Notice how large I made these letters. That's like the most important thing in this whole talk. Flow. As we started investigating flow, we learned there's actually other kinds of flow. And the big one that we found was called psychological flow. And we were afraid it's flow versus flow. Are we destroying the psychological flow when we start working as a team because we're interrupting each other, so to speak? And this was coined, the term flow was coined by this fellow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I don't know how to say his name. I never met him, but if anybody here has that same last name, I'd love to hear later how to pronounce it, okay? He coined this back in the 70s, maybe, a long time ago. I've read 2 or 3 of his books, and they're big, thick books. Okay, so to put it succinctly, this is a state we can get into. Flow is a state we can get into when we're fully immersed in something, when we're fully focused on something. And it allows us to achieve a kind of excellence. And we were afraid, are we destroying this kind of flow? But we talked about it as a team, and we started believing that we were staying in the zone somehow, which is another way to say it for programmers. That we're focused, we're getting a lot done, it allows us to feel confident in our work, and we are happy with the results. So, are we getting this? Are we destroying it? Well, that's not a very good question. We'll look at a better question in a second. We started thinking, well, maybe we're not destroying it. Because everybody had the freedom to keep their brain in the space they need to be in it, have it in. As we went through the day, you could go and take a walk, take a break, go work alone. You could sit with the team and say, I'm going to check out for a while. I'm going to look at my own computer or my phone. I've worked with some teams, they don't allow them to have their phone or computer, but I don't see anything wrong with it. We think with our computers nowadays, right? And you want to check your stock, values because you're programmers. Okay. We were afraid we might be destroying it, but we thought maybe we're not. But we still wanted a better question, and this was the one we came up with. Is there some other kind of psychological flow we don't know about? And sure enough, but we couldn't find any research on it. So we started doing our own research. We read books, looked at pictures, watched videos, listened to podcasts about people working well as a team in other fields than software development. And this is what we found. Like these pictures just show people that we thought looked like they're working in flow. Here's some kids learning to play guitar in their garage. Here's some people at a very well-known computer innovation space. Anybody know where this is? Xerox PARC. You win a t-shirt if I had one to throw to you, but I don't. This picture here is my favorite. Could you imagine the manager says, 5 people doing the work of one? If we're wheeling him in for his heart operation, and he looks around and says, 5 surgeons to do one operation? I'm not paying for that. No, they're going to want that, aren't they? There's 10 people in this operation, each with their own skill, their own ability. And this is an operation that took an extended amount of time. It's a very famous operation on a 12-year-old patient in 1944. First time ever this was done. They probably practiced it dozens and dozens of times. They needed everybody there. You stay in the same space, in the same context. I loved these things, and then we found the research. Team flow. Great paper. It's now available as a book. Look at these things. Collective ambition. Common goal. Aligned personal goals. High skill integration. Is this not defining what we were experiencing? Open communication is safety to communicate well. A sense of unity. These are the things that build a sense of joint progress. These are the things that build over time. The mutual trust, and we get this holistic focus. If we can do this, then we can maybe get this team flow, and this is what we felt we were getting. So the team flow was very important, and we've covered 2 kinds of flow. Before we're done today, I want to cover another kind of flow. This picture is to remind me of something. Does anybody see, what does this look like to you besides a bowl? What is this? What? We are beyond that, beyond what it actually is. What does it look like? A smiley face or a surprised face, right? We have this thing in us that we will look at things and we will see patterns in it that aren't actually there. That's not a smiley face, but it's a thing that looks like a smiley face. So about 50% of people will see that and see the smiley face, according to some research I read. So I'm looking at the world from my point of view. So this is a warning again. Probably everything I believe is wrong. So don't say, oh, Woody said this, so it's the truth. There is no truth here. So this is just a warning. Now I'm going to tell you about what I saw with what I call lean flow. So this lean flow came to me. My wife makes all the artwork in my talks. And I asked her, can you make a picture of me when I was a kid? And I worked in a plant nursery, watering plants, another kind of flow. And I thought, this is perfect. That's exactly what I looked like, I think. I love that picture. But anyways, lean flow. So lean flow comes from the ideas of manufacturing. It's very similar to what was made popular with the term lean. In 1970s, I worked at a company that used these principles, but they didn't call it lean in those days. The basic idea is very straightforward. They would not manufacture anything unless somebody ordered it. Then they would make it as directly as possible from start to finish. Same basic idea. So if we use this in manufacturing, the complete production of one piece from start to finish without the queuing, without the inventory, or as little as possible. There's no perfect in this world, right? This is defining it for manufacturing. So the question I would ask is, can we accomplish this in software development? And I wouldn't be giving this talk if I didn't think that was true. And I found a good book on this subject that was written about the time we started working this way. I didn't discover this book for a couple more years. I've read it 4 times now, and I still am barely understanding most of it. But I have a bit of a suggestion for you. If you can get a copy of this book, put it on your desk and make it look like you're reading it. The rest of the people in your company will think you are pretty smart. So it's something to try. It's something to try. I read this book the first couple times. I took notes, and as I go back and read my notes, I missed most of what he was saying. The last, what I would consider experts, and I learned a lot more out of it. He talks about flow, but in this case, I want to just talk about the principle of queuing waste. He has a whole chapter of principles about queuing and why we need to understand it. So this is what he says. Queues are the root cause of the majority of economic waste in product development. Donald Reinertson. He lives about 100 miles from me, but I've never actually met him. I would like to. But here's the thing. If this was true, what would you do? If this, at least try to figure out what can we do to at least reduce the queuing. I've been to many big companies. I went to a huge manufacturer in our industry of computer chips. I talked to a few executives, and I asked them, what do you think of this? And they said, oh yeah, our research has shown about 90% of the waste of time in developing our products comes from this queuing, waiting for meetings, waiting for other people. In our case, we talked about question queue time. It's related. I like this. So what are we going to do about it? Queues create some problems. One big one is the longer cycle time. Cycle time is the amount of time it takes to go from the start of something to the finish of it. And again, our keynote this morning, Michael Feathers talked about this, of doing things in the small. At least that's part of how I understood it. Okay, whatever gets into my brain isn't necessarily what was meant by the speaker. All the rest of this comes off of that increased cycle time. Understanding cycle time I think is important. So now I can define flow for myself in software development, very similar to how we would define it for manufacturing. This is pretty straightforward. Each story or idea flows from the beginning to end as directly as possible. And when I mean end, that's working software. To me, the Agile Manifesto defines working software, and I use it to mean software that is doing the work it was intended to do. It doesn't mean it passes the tests. It means it's being used by the people who need to be using it. If we can do this directly without all of those wastes that we saw earlier, the big ones are the queuing and the inventory, but some other big ones are the distractions, the interruptions, the context switching, and the multitasking. But there are many others as well. I've worked on projects where when we got to the end of the project, it wasn't at all what the customer wanted. That's because the feedback loop was, we got instructions at the beginning, we wrote the software, when we delivered it, that was the first time the customer saw it. And this kind of issue is not flowing directly from start to finish if it's taking us 2 weeks, or in the case in those days, 2 years. I worked on a 6-month project once, back in 1999. It was meant to be 3 months, but they were not sure. They said it would be 6 months maybe. How long does it take to do a 6-month project? Does anybody know? What's that? 12 months. That's very, that took them 3 years. 3 years. It took them 2 years. I was there 6 months and I left because it was so painful. They went another 18 months before they could start delivering it, and another year or so to determine the customers wouldn't use it, and they canceled the project. From what I calculated, they spent $76 million to deliver something nobody wanted. I could have done that for half that price. Okay? Give me $30 million and I'll deliver nothing. No problem. Okay. So you notice I did smile. I have smiled now. That usually means I tried to tell a joke. Okay. So you are at a Scrum event. If you are in a talk and they do not put a circle, it is not a Scrum talk. So I put the circle for you. You now have a circle and you know this is about Agile, okay? This is not a linear process. This is drawn to look like a linear process. We go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, but we don't really, because we can stop at any point, because the learning doesn't just happen here. So at any point we are moving in our learning, and that allows us to steer. How short can we make this? I like the way that it's said here. Small, inexpensive attempt at value. And that's where the knowledge, that's where the steering happens for us. So if we can do that, when we achieved this flow, this is what we found. We worked more on the right things. Remember, this is effectiveness. More on the right things that includes the exploration, the experimenting, the discovery. It's all about discovery. If you're doing stuff that does not require discovery, I wouldn't call it development. It's configuration or something, right? It's in the simpler space. Pardon me. And we did way less of the wrong things, the bad things. And I won't put too much into this, but the big ones are the queuing and the waiting and the inventory. But one thing I've noticed on teams, I like this one here, arguing, discussing rather than trying things. I've worked on teams where they would discuss something for a day that they could have tried in less than an hour. And then they get real knowledge. The talking doesn't get you the results. It's in the doing of the work that we discover the work that we must do. So until we start actually doing something, we're not getting into the learning. And somebody here, Joe, I was here earlier. Where did he go? Oh, there he is. He's way the. You were much. Yes. Yeah. And so here's the thing. If we're not building something, we're not getting the learning. We need to take the action. Okay, so we're kind of to the end. We've realized that we were achieving this lean flow. That's where this lean flow, that's where our process started. It was in achieving the lean flow that we start realizing maybe we need to be, this is the answer to the question, how can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? With software teaming, what are we optimizing for? By now, you should be able to understand this. We're optimizing for the flow of the work. However you understand that to be, that's much more important than optimizing for the output of the individual. And most places I worked over the years, they're measuring for the output of the individual. They're optimizing so everybody can get the most of their kind of work done. Matter of fact, I think coming soon in the future, I'm going to be discussing this quite a bit more. Almost everywhere I've worked, I think the concept of roles is problematic. We have a product owner or a coder or a tester, and these things overlap a great deal more than you might think. I don't know if you've ever had Fred George to come here and do a talk, but if you can, get him. He used to do a talk about 10 years ago called Programmer Anarchy, in which he tells us why all the things I believe are true are wrong. I like that kind of a thing, but this is a very important part for me. So we're not trying to get the most out of each person. We're trying to get the best, create an environment where we'll get the best from each person into what we're doing. I love this picture quite a bit, by the way. I think the title of this was, Emily was afraid they would discover she was an imposter. I think that's a pretty nice picture. She was trying to go to kindergarten, I guess. So I can answer our original question. How can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? That's because of these flows. The psychological flow, not versus the lean flow, it's plus the lean flow. And we have 3 kinds of flow. We have the individual psychological flow, the team psychological flow, and the lean flow. Individual plus team plus lean flow. And some brilliant programmer at a talk I gave a few years ago shouted out, "Oh, that's flow plus plus." I said, okay, now I understand why it's called C++. So I thought that's a good joke. It's the best joke in my whole talk. So the last something I learned in my 20s, someone I turned to for some mentorship on the kind of work I was doing. I was a sign painter. With a brush, I would paint lettering. And I saw this really beautiful lettering in town this gentleman was doing. And I said, I want to learn to do that. So I found his phone number and I called him. And I said, I want to learn to do this beautiful, elegant lettering that you do. Can you show me how to do that? He said, well, I can show you, but there's something way more important. And this is what he shared. I went down to his office. It was downtown San Diego on the 2nd story of one of those old buildings, the Granger building. And I went in there and he said, this is what's important. The object isn't to create art. It's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. So mob programming or software teaming, I don't think is that important of a thing. Having an environment where things like that can emerge, can evolve and become something is a higher level of importance. The greatness that we can bring forward requires an environment where we can nurture that. And I like this saying. I've followed this for years, not necessarily very well, but over the years I've gotten better at it. Hopefully this has been useful to you. I think we're near the end. Software teaming and the power of flow. Did I get that right? Does that actually say anything? Okay, that's meant to say thank you very much or something like that. So thank you. I had a wonderful time. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I can always give you some answers. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that worked for the interpreter. I tried to go slow enough for them. Is there any questions? Oh, very good. Oh, good, good. I didn't either. I should have. Sorry. Take your drink now. It's my fault. I apologize. No question. Are there any questions?
座ったままですいません。お話ありがとうございます。今私は大きな会社さんの、現場にビジネスパートナーとしてスクラムマスターで入っています。で、そこの現場はものすごくリソース効率化が優先されていて、フロー効率化になりません。で、フロー効率化を目指そうとしたら、ある程度現場のメンバーに遊びがないといけないと思うんですけれども、そのお客さんの偉い人は、遊びを許さない人です。要するに、そのチームを、創生するのにこれぐらいお金がかかってるから、メンバーを遊ばせるわけにいかない。でも、個人的にはリソースの方が成果が出ると思っているので、それを進めたいって思ってます。どうすればこの、お客さんの偉い人を説得できるのか、お知恵をいただけないでしょうか。
I probably interpreted it to explain it. Please. Yes. This is a complex question. If you'd like, I'm going to answer only a very little bit. And if you want, I'll do it one short sentence at a time. So if you want to interpret for me, we can do that. First of all, if I was good at convincing people of things, I would probably be a very rich man. So taking advice from me is not really the right person for advice, but I can tell you my opinion. Do you want to interpret that part, or do you want me to continue on? Okay, so over a 10-year period from 1999 till 2009, I spent a great deal of my time figuring out how to influence change when I wasn't the person in charge. What ended up happening for me was at two levels. One was outside the company, building recognition of my credibility and capabilities to the general audience of software development in my area. The other was inside the company, that finding allies and other people who are ready to think about the new ideas. I knew for myself throughout my life that I can't even, if I pick up a ball and I say, go fetch to the dog, and I throw the ball, they'll just sit there and they won't go get the ball. So I can't convince a dog to run and play. So I'm not very good at convincing. But what I learned was this: if I am willing to take risks, I can get the changes I want. They don't always work. So you have to take this with a grain of salt, which means it might fail and you might lose your job. So the first thing I would do for myself was look for those allies, other people who are ready to think about things in a new way. So that's one thing that worked well for me. And one of the things I would often do is I would have a piece of paper that I had printed out an article, for example, about pair programming. And if I met somebody new in the company, I'd say, hey, I heard you in that meeting, and I read this article about pair programming. I'd like to know what you think. Would you read it for me? One of two things will happen. I will never see them again, or they'll come back to me and say, I read it, and whether they agree or not, I don't care. It's somebody I can talk with. So I'm looking for those people. Another thing that I had done was I was looking for the failures where someone else needed help. If someone else needs help, and I notice it before they're really asking for it, I can go to them and say, we have a few extra hours, I can help. And that way I was building people who were willing to accept my help. So when it came time for me to ask them to help me, they would feel guilty if they weren't ready to help me back. So it was reciprocal. I was always looking for an opportunity to help. The biggest emergencies were the biggest opportunities. If something was failing so bad that someone wanted to get out of it, I would offer to take it over. I'll take it over as long as I get to do it my own way. Usually when it's that bad, they want to get rid of it no matter what. I was able to exercise these things. So that was over a 10-year period. So I have no easy way to convince people, but I do have a list I've been building. There's a great book from Linda Rising called Fearless Change. You've probably seen that book. That's like got a bunch of patterns of influencing change. So there's really three things there. You must have a lot of knowledge and experience. You must be willing to build relationships, And you must be able or willing to build the credibility and influence you need to have. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. And like right now, you're here, oh, you're listening to this guy, he talks about this stuff. I'm no different than you are. I'm just maybe at a slightly different place in the path. You can find a better way to do anything I've done. So I would love to see your talk in 2 years about that guy, Woody. It was okay, but look at what we've done now. I want to hear about the ways you figure out how to influence. Now, that was a long answer, but ask one question, you'll get at least 3 answers from me. So this is how we do it here. Is there any other questions? Was that useful? Okay. I wish I could give you, I have a long list of things, but I wish I could give you something really useful. It takes time. It takes time. I've seen big changes happen. Big changes. Any other questions? Maybe we're done.
So sorry, time is up. So
We have to be done.
yes.
Yes, because there's another speaker coming in. Yeah, another session. Thank you all again very, very much. Thank you all very, very much.